everyone. Welcome back to Innovation Nation today. I have Jon Harris and as special guest with us today, Rob Lydic, who is going to be joining us in the conversation to continue what we started last week around artificial intelligence. We briefly touched on, the video management side of the house and the why behind using video analytics and computer vision. And today we're going to talk about access control and the why behind that and what the possibilities really are. So Jon, if you can quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll have Rob introduce himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. Excited to be back. So Jon Harris, I am the Director of Enterprise Solutions with Guidepost Solutions, which is a global technology and compliance consulting firm. And if you want to know more, go to the website, guidepostsolutions.com. You can read all about me there. I won't waste your time with background and such. So more importantly, let's talk about Rob.
Well, I don't know about more importantly, but I'm Rob Lydic. I've been running the Inside Access Control podcast and messaging, working with the likes of Leo Dest. My background has been in access control for the last 9 years. And before that, and some overlap with video surveillance, mostly working with manufacturers, working with those manufacturers, understanding what the channel is, understanding what the technology and how effectively to really solve problems for customers. So I'm excited to be able to participate in today's conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to let Jon kick it off for us today. How does that sound?
That's great. Thanks. So kind of to segue from last session into this one, last episode, we dove into the why around AI and analytics and machine learning and all that as it applies to the security industry. And we really focused on video management, video surveillance, and how that has matured and really embraced AI and how that could be used as kind of a success map to look at an application in security and how it performs well. And we started to get into the discussion, and Rob, this is what prompted us to get you involved. As you mentioned, you've been in the access control industry for a decade or more, and really understand the channel and the manufacturing, the marketing, and that's where we really want to kind of dig into, because the question we posed is, does the same intrinsic value that we identified and the capability to automate and demanualize and unleash untapped potential that we talked about in video, does that exist in access control? Or are we comparing apples to oranges? And are we really still that it's a lock, it's a key, it's a credential, authorization or not, door opens or closes, you're notified when bad things happen, and really that's it? And is trying to combine AI and all the other categorical components to it, just not a good fit. And so I know there's a lot to unpack there. It's a big question, but maybe really starting with there, do you feel that access control is a primed marketplace for AI to evolve?
Well, it certainly is. And as you pointed out, video surveillance was the first to really pick it up. Mm-hmm. And I think we're still very much in the infancy on video, understanding what it is, being able to define the difference between AI and machine learning and analytics. That is still very much Wild West, and you are seeing some clarity come as a result of it. If you relate video surveillance to the access control industry, as you pointed, video is sexy. Like you can see it, people get it, you can look at, and we as humans are visual, and we love to see what's going on because a picture can tell 1,000 words, and video tells even more. So it's awesome that video does this, and video has recognized over the last, honestly, 5 years, it hasn't been that long, that video is amassing a ton of data. And there's petabytes and petabytes of data laying all over the place, entirely unanalyzed, that can give us a lot more information than we previously had. Like it's the Valhalla of data. Honestly, Google and Microsoft and Amazon, everybody want it, and they have no idea how to get it.
Right.
Like they began to the ring thing and all this other stuff within these big mega techs, and they want that data, but the corporations keep it in this nice little box on their servers or everything that's there. And now there's cloud video, which quite frankly isn't very proliferated. It's 99% on premise and 1% in the cloud. Huge opportunities, and everybody wants to get it. So video always leads in many regards to innovation, and access control follows. Honestly, it is a more, if it could be possibly more conservative than video, it is more conservative than video. It does move slower, and innovation is slower, quite frankly, because it's not as plug and play. It's more tangible. It requires more stuff. Doors, hinges, frames, locks, colors. Like, people love to dork out about that stuff, right? Of what does my handle look like? What color is my handle? Is it electronic? Is it connecting this way or that way? And people are like, and then you get into access control. And have either of you actually looked at an access control interface? I mean, looking at video management looks like this. It's like, hey, I got a bunch of cameras. I can go see that. We see it online all the time of, hey, I watched this burglary and I can't believe that guy was that stupid. Yeah. Watching access control is it's mind numbing, by the way.
Yeah.
Because you're just watching lines and lines of presentations of credentials, and this person went to that area, and try and keep up with that. Go to a Fortune 500, watch their enterprise access control system, and try and make sense of it.
Right.
But interestingly, comparing the two, access control is genuine security, meaning it prevents people from getting in places they shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. Video is responsive for 99% of the applications. We couldn't prevent something from happening. It happened. Now let's go watch it. Or now we can identify who did it. Access control actively stops people from doing those things. They don't get in that gate. They don't get in the door. They don't have the access to the data center. You are granting access for a contractor at one time. They can go to the specific area and please leave. And we know the information that's there. So the data is there. It's again, no different than video, certainly not petabytes of data, but lots of transactions, lots of data points that can be utilized, and some are to create automation of what is going on in my building. And do I want those things to happen? That's the security side of it. And no different than Sarah deals with every day. There's other benefits, right? There's other things we can do with this other than I lock a door and I unlock the door. I watch somebody on camera. I watch them disappear. It's so much bigger.
So there's two things that you brought up that I want to double click on. One of them is the data, right? Is that so a little bit of storytelling, because I had some great success when I was a security leader for a corporation. I needed to find a way for the organization to invest more in my security technology. So I mined the access control data one day, and I determined how many of the people who had hardware offices ever came into, because we had an office space issue. We had a conference room space issue and an office space issue. So I took all this data and I pulled in an Excel spreadsheet and I ran endless reports and gave it to my team and said, tell me in the last 3 months, how many of these people have actually stepped foot in the office and how many days and for how many hours. And we pulled that together and I gave it all over to our executive facility director and said, I just solved your space problem. We need hoteling suites. We need, this and that. And we switched this person hasn't been here in 2 years and they have a nameplate on that office. Like nobody uses that office. And I said, but it took me about 80 hours of manpower to do this. And if I upgrade to this other system, I can do this every day. And actually we can optimize our space usage in real time. And we met somewhere in the middle, right? It wouldn't let me go all in and kind of integrate the whole world. But I remember working on a project when I worked for an access control manufacturer that we were helping a large higher education institution in Chicago integrate their conference room and lab scheduling system with their access control system and optimize usage. And now in the COVID world, you can see how that could be even more significantly used. And so, the data and the potential of the data and unleashing the data feels to me like the place to start. Like, how do you farm out the data and start to make it make sense and solve problems for you? And some of those problems, and you got to go to the end users and figure out what those problems are, instead of just like sitting in a room with your engineers and speaking about the manufacturers and just coming up with use cases that no one cares about. Because I think we see a lot of that where it's not real things that are being asked for. And then the prevention, I just love the way, and then like you talked about video being visual and access control not, but I wonder if it could be. Like, I wonder if you could gamify access control and make it more of like a sexy UI that someone sits in front of, and it feels more like my kids playing Roblox than it does an old, Mac OS, integrated system flowing just information like the Matrix in front of you. So there's not really a question in there. I guess it's just more comments. Like, as you think about how to get at that data, what it could be used for, and like how do we reimagine the user interface? Because I feel like that's like the work. Like, you sit down and you look at and I actually read this in Lee's book, The 6 Phase Changes. He talks about the user interface, or maybe it was one of his blog comments, maybe it was both, where access control has been designed for the integrator and the administrator, and not for the user. Not for the user of the credential, nor for the user of the actual system, typically a security officer. And that's why it's so hard to learn. And that's why people don't change, in my opinion, access control systems often, because it took me 2 years to learn how to use OnGuard. I can't change to AMAG because it's just too hard to teach my officers how to use a new system. So I'm just going to stick with what I got, and I'm not going to upgrade it because then it'll look different. And then I got to train them all over again too. So those are the two places that I see. I like your thoughts on those areas.
So I think you touched on a big theme that exists in my world, working with manufacturers, is the definition of what real value is, and opening up things that customers really care about. It is absolutely foundational that access control software and hardware need to let the right people in at the right times and keep the bad people out at the wrong times. That's core. But it has the opportunity to be so much more. And I'm glad you used the example of your company, because I've worked with a number of integrators and a number of manufacturers that are solving some unique problems like that. When you look at corporate real estate, and let's just pick a city like New York City, and if you can have a building with 30 different tenants in it, and you as the building manager need to know who's using the facilities of that building and charge accordingly, because you've got one tenant, to your point, nobody shows up, nobody's in that building, yet they're paying for their space, thank you very much. And yet you've got tenant down the road that only has 1,000 square feet, yet they've got 7,000 visitors flowing through there every day, using the bathrooms, using the electricity, using the elevator. That's a very different cost model. And it's actually an opportunity for monetization for that building manager or that building owner to say, wow, we've got a hyper user here. And those reports or AI of simple data that this tenant is granting X amount of visitor badges or is utilizing the common space at a greater extent should be automated. It should be not in a report. It should be a cool little heat map that gets sent to that person to say, hey, by the way, Sarah with Alcatraz over there, she is inviting 10,000 people to do demos all day long. We really need to raise her rent. And that's just one of the examples. I think multifamily has that opportunity, and it's certainly for access control. exceptionally important. What you may or may not be aware of is that most corporations and even governments use their access control as their primary interface into security because it provides real security. It's what they're looking at every day. To your point, they get married to it. And there are some manufacturers of access control that were smart and they go, well, we're going to bring in video into our platform and we'll get the pretty pictures next to everything else. And we're going to tag when somebody presents their credential, it's to pop up their picture of their credential and I can have the operator verify that that was that real person. Do I need an operator to do that, by the way? Or can I have artificial intelligence and machine learning correlate? These are the markers of Rob. Rob presented his credential and I've got a tertiary validation that it is Rob that just walked into the facility. And it wasn't Rob and John and Sarah following using Bill's credential. I mean, that's very basic, but the realities of the opportunity are there. And the other reality is access control, why people don't switch is because it's so integrated into who they are. Mm-hmm. It's integrated into their PeopleSoft HR system that when somebody becomes redundant, they take them out of PeopleSoft, it trickles over to their AMAG system and tells them, hey, that person's card no longer works. And they didn't have to go into a different system and go do it. It's integrated in their financial systems of time and attendance. And here's what we paid Sarah for the day because she showed up for 5 hours and she's an hourly employee. Mm-hmm. It's integrated into their video system, a number of other things. Right. And as a result, I've got cross-functional engagement in the access control system. And who in the hell wants to go fight the fight of, I got to go teach finance a new integration and I'm going to go disconnect that for a day. And then I've got to go work with HR. And then I've got to go work with the security people. And then I've got to go work with all my contractors to go. That's a big no.
And it feels like that there's a problem to be solved. And Sarah, I think you and I talked about this on an earlier session, and I know I've had this conversation with multiple clients of mine, is there's a solution available in creating more of an AI engine that does that job and de-emphasizes the need for a heavy access control system. PSM tried to do it, but never really lived up to it. PIAM is solving just the identity piece of it, but not the rest of the functionality. But if you took just a true, deep learning like Splunk, and you brought it in and said, we're going to teach Splunk to do all this stuff, and then Splunk's going to be it, and then, really whatever access control system becomes interchangeable because all it's doing is giving me the credential and the identity, right? Or not even the identity, that's being fed through LDAP, Active Directory, PeopleSoft, or whatever. And I know that's scary for our industry because it devalues the thing that is the engine. I mean, access control, I think like traditionally is the horse that security rode in on, right? That's like, the first thing that we did. All these companies you think about when you like trace it back, and this isn't like a promotional show for Lee, though he is one of the people producing our show, but he posted recently about doing some historical research on, and I can't wait to read it because I feel like it's going to drive back to like on the guard side, you have Pinkerton, and then our company is all about locksmiths or like the physical security technologies. You can trace it back to locksmiths, right? So you have, the U.S. Marshal federal agents on the guard side, you have locking hardware on all sides. So, and so it makes sense that that's a protected area, but protectionism really hushes down innovation. And I feel like that's where we're at, where it's like, the protection of my fiefdom is to, because it wasn't created here, I won't use it, as opposed to, trying to figure out a way to replace yourself, really, because if you don't, someone else is going to, and it feels like we're at that inflection point where, I feel super confident, and I don't mind saying this, that Google or Amazon is going to buy up some startup that's close to fixing this, come in and just throw a solution that's going to blow everything else away and take this over. Like it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in the next 3 years, and it could really screw things up for a lot of companies who don't step in front of that and take advantage of it sooner, because we all know the problems here. It's just a reluctance, I think, to solve it.
I'll tell you, I'm working with some of those companies, and they're salivating over the lack of innovation in that market. Because the reality of the opportunity is massive. Yeah. When you look at what their end game is, which is owning identity and allowing a user to be in their ecosystem, taking advantage of all these other things, which by the way are monetization of that. And they've already got all that monetization figured out. Advertising. I mean, I worked with an access control manufacturer that I came across in Israel, that they're not in the Americas, but they showed me some interesting possibilities of just using geofencing associated with access control. And as you walk by a building and you were happening to using this banking app, which was access control, by the way, that you entered their fence, they pushed you an ad and said, please come into our bread store because we are giving you, Rob, a 20% discount on bread because I walked in their geofence, and boom, I want to go walk in and buy bread because I needed it anyway. Yeah. And I can spare the extra 5 minutes, and they grant me access to the facility, know who I am. By the way, they get past my demographics and know what more to sell me. And it leveraged an access control system. And by the way, they're coming and when we look, I loved your point of the history. When Lee comes out with this, I'm going to just have a heyday with it, because it also speaks to the existence of how we do architectures today. Physical hardware. Like, I'm still waiting for somebody to explain to me, why the hell do we have a 12-inch by 12-inch circuit board that opens and closes doors? Like, hello, I have this cool little device that can help me operate across the entire universe. And I can go whatever street I want to go. I can translate into any language I want to talk about. And my wife can find me at all times. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, I love that your story about example about the Israeli company. I mean, so I work in a shared office space that's partners with a gym that's next door to it. And when I come in and I'm within, the geofence, it pops up my gym membership and tells me the schedule for the day. Like, hey, remember that you liked going to this class before. It's available at noon if you want a break. When I go by my local grocery store that I've loaded their app on my phone, and as long as I've said okay to the location tracking, when I come in their geofence, it pops me up and says like, hey, here are today's deals. Like it's happening today. And that credential that I have, because it's in my Apple wallet, so it's a credential. Because it hooks me up, and it's also connected to Apple Pay, right? So they've made my barrier to coming in and buying stuff from them extremely low, like zero, right? They're reaching out to me and saying, hey John, we got donuts. Man, I love donuts. Here we go. Let's go.
Here's my face. Can I buy it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then and they use this as a facial recognition. Exactly. It tells me like, hey, we want to make sure this is you. Before we approve this transaction, hold your phone up to your face. So you're right. I mean, it's all out there and it's being used, and it's and the data is something that just really intrigues me, because it's like there's so much available there about your identity. Meaning, so when I talk about like the physical access data, when you come, where you go, how often you're there. And I looked at, and we talked about this last time, Sarah, about behavioral profiles, I see this as more of like highly restrictive, highly regulated organizations, even government contractors that have to have insider threat programs where you can build logical behavioral profiles for employees. It sounds a little, 1984-ish, but it allows them to automate the identification of potential yellow flag behavioral activities for somebody coming outside. And so it's not just like it's, are there any HR warnings? So if like I'm given a warning for, acting out or, violence, whatever, I like get pissed and yell at my boss. If they have a system that they put that in and that hooks into access control, and then I start showing up late or coming in on the weekends or doing things odd, now all of a sudden that raises to the top and says, John's showed 3 signs of oddness. We should engage. And what I mean by engage is have a conversation and find out, is something wrong? I mean, I had a personal experience with an active shooter incident early on in my career where we terminated somebody and he came back and shot himself outside of our building. He had a full loaded Beretta with 2 other clips, could have came in and done a lot more worse damage. And from our after the fact investigation, we think that was the intent. And for some reason, he changed his mind. If we would have had something like that in place, we would at least have had a visual of being able to engage him upstream before the spark to intervene in that type of activity, maybe save a life. So this isn't just like kind of window dressing, theoretical stuff that is going to just, make it easier to buy shit. Like there's actual life-saving application to this and human behavioral intervention when you pull this all together with all the information. Because if your HR system is already hooked into access control, why not merge the data and get all the information out of it? Are there other things happening in your workplace that you can be viewing and then add video to it, right? I mean, so there's like this whole integrated security program concept here that I think can be doing a lot more. And when it's automated, then it just happens and you don't have to have humans. Like today, it's all like analysts sitting there having to ingest all this and make decisions. And as much of that as you can automate, the better off you are.
So I think you brought up an interesting topic that hits another pathway that I won't go too deep into. And I think that it's important for the industry as we use this, that there are ethics associated with it. And as we look at what are we doing with the data, what is an identity, how are those things being created to benefit the world and not in nefarious manners. And
right.
We've watched the megatechs, and they're being a bit harassed for it, rightfully so. The Apples, the Googles, the Amazons, that their algorithms are created such to do one thing, to sell more to us, to get our engagement, to continue to keep us in that spot. And as these players enter this space, that there needs to be, or the existing players that are in the market and they're developing these things, that there needs to be kindness, ethics, and benefits to the world and to the corporations that are pervasive. If it's, hey, I want to use this for energy savings. Hey, I want to use access control and automate it with an integration with my intrusion and burglar system, which is present elsewhere, like in Australia, New Zealand. That's table stakes. And there's workflows with that. And what can we do from an AI perspective and a machine learning perspective to leverage that information? But nobody wants a recreation fictionally into reality of 1984 or the perception that we're all marked and owned. I think that there is some technologies that are becoming very present, specifically in access control, where you and I as individuals own our identity and we choose to share that identity with corporations and others as we are comfortable, and we can manage that. We can grant access to whatever respective subset of data that we choose. We can grant access for that corporation to analyze our data and those ethics associated with the individual and what they're providing and what they're gaining from a corporate, governmental, or other entity, I think is incumbent upon how these things are created. We want to create tangible financial results, which create those benefits that we were speaking about outside of opening and closing a door. There's lots of that there. There's lots of that data. But I think it's incumbent upon the manufacturers and others to solve that problem of how do we use this? How do we make life better? How do we reduce cost? How do we increase industries? How do we integrate with other ancillary technologies to make life better, to make the technology better, and to make humanity, raise the profile there?
Yeah. And I feel like people who will listen to what you just say will feel like that is like a lofty, huge pie in the sky objective. I think that is what we need. We need to have big, audacious goals. We have to have a positive objective for our industry to shoot for, and making the world a better place is it, right? It's like that's when you have that type of true north. That's going to be powerful to move people towards that, as opposed to saying, I got a reader that blinks green as opposed to blue. Come check it out, right? That's when we're talking about life-changing, industry-altering activity that is going to bring the best and brightest to your cause, meaning the best talent, the best technology, the best effort out of people. And that's where I think we can stave off some of that massive disruption from up top if we have that groundswell of positivity coming in. And also funding, right? People want to fund things that are going to make a positive impact. So you want to get, that type of great funding to come into some of these small firms that have great ideas. If that's what we're focusing on, we're going to have a real easy time doing that and getting people behind our cause.
Agreed. You need the financials to justify it all, right? So everybody look for, as you're creating things, you want to have a return on the investment. But I'll tell you, from an access control perspective, the opportunity is ripe for taking, and the leaders of today will not be the leaders of tomorrow, because the leaders of today continue to adopt proprietary and closed systems of credentials, software, panels, and they want themselves to be the entry and exit point for that customer. And the foundation, if we've learned anything, honestly, from the technology proliferation, everything is about platform. Mm-hmm. I don't care if you exist in the Microsoft world as a platform, an Apple world, a Google world. They allow a platform and they allow innovation to come in. And they may charge a toll in and out, but they don't care who comes in, as long as you play by some ethical rules, and they can, and in many of their cases, they charge that toll.
Make some money, yeah.
But in access control, we've just sit here and say, no, it's mine and it's mine only, and you stay away, and somebody's going to come in. Well, many people are coming in.
It's happening.
They're moving the cheese.
Yeah.
We're having a cheese party. Here we go.
I mean, you guys, I've been quiet, as we all know, for certain reasons. I want to let you guys, take the show here. It's obviously my podcast, but I will say, a lot of what you're talking about is happening today. And I think there's two ways we need to think about it. One, the users who are accessing the spaces, the users with the credentials, right, who own their own currency, own their own identity, and then the folks who are trying to protect the spaces, the security teams, the people who are administering, who are deploying. And how are we using AI to meet both of those needs and create value and keep both in mind when it comes to having the best interests, right? And doing it for the right reasons. if we're just going to surveil like we've always done with facial recognition on cameras just to see who's who and match it with names, what's the value? What are we really doing with that? And if anything, it's upsetting people. It's making people frustrated. I don't want you to know where I am when I am, wherever I am, right? And why do you need that information? And that's why facial recognition, for example, has gotten so many negative opinions around it, because it's a great technology, but what is it being used for? How are we using it?
Yeah.
Are we
Well, that's
using
what
it
it's
to,
been.
you know?
When it's being tied to those, as you mentioned, Rob, those more nefarious use cases where you see, and that's where, I mean, our whole mission, Sarah, when we started off talking about beginning this discussion, was demystifying AI around, it's not this like black tradecraft that is spooky and scary that, but there are use cases where in certain countries, there's individuals walking around with Google Glass like devices for law enforcement that's scanning faces against active warrants, or where your face is being utilized to register you against a, social credit score. And that's determining whether or not you can enter certain spaces. Like that's happening today. And so people see those news stories and they go, facial recognition, bad. And so you're already having to kind of pull back and say, there's good here. But I think, Rob, you pointed it out where it's like you have to have that ethical true north, and you always say this, Sarah, that AI is human developed and created. You set the rules and you unleash it. So if you don't have the good rules in place, it can't do the good stuff. So part of that too is like there's this I forget what book I was reading, but it was about AI, and they were talking about programming of automated vehicles or autonomous vehicles. And when someone walks out into the street, is the primary objective going to be save the driver or save the kid chasing the basketball? You got to program one or the other. Man, that's you got to program one or the other, because if it's save the pedestrian, you're going to weave off the car into oncoming traffic and potentially kill 5 people, 10 people, 20. But if you don't weave off, you're going to kill maybe that kid, right? So, I mean, that's heavy stuff. I mean, our access control doesn't necessarily dive into that, but I mean, that's like what's at stake when you're creating the baseline rules for these algorithms. So like when you think about what am I going to be performing downstream, like for instance, if it's like when someone puts in their notice, I'm going to cut off all their access, and it also is connected to their direct deposit. Now I'm cutting off their payment. Like make sure we think that one through, guys, because maybe, we're just, they're transferring from one business unit to the other, and this is the way the workflow works. And all of a sudden we just turned off their pay, their direct deposit payment for their paycheck. So, I think yeah, I mean, it's like usual when Sarah and I get these discussions, like so much to unpack there. We could go into so many different directions, but maybe what I would want to ask you, Rob, is there one use case, short put, simplified thing that you see in access control where we're not doing it today with AI or automation to the extent that we could, and we should be, and there's like no reason not to, and it should be. Like it should start on January 1st, 2021. Like there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing it this way.
Yeah, I think there's 2 really easy short putts, and I won't classify them as AI per se, but absolutely automation. And the first is building automation, to your point where we've got access control. We know who is where in roughly what zones. It's not that hard to set up zones, and we can manage lighting and heating accordingly. Right?
Smart buildings.
Not that hard, particularly when we say you need to present your card prior to entering this space. And it can be added on all the way down to individual offices. And there are manufacturers that say, hey, we can put a BLE beacon in an office and we can tell if somebody's in the office so we can manage lighting and heating accordingly. No different than when you walk into a hotel, you have to put your key in the wall. Otherwise, it doesn't allow the HVAC and the lighting to work. Very easy, very simple. The second is integration with intrusion.
Mhm.
So if we're doing Berg and fire associated with these things, it's done elsewhere in the world. Now I'm picking on the United States. Like it may be present in small business, but the reality is it's not pervasive in big business where, hey, I know that this window is broken. It's just sending an alarm out, via an annunciator out to the police or whatever service they've got. But there's lots of access control flow that comes in via that there's also a lot of other things that are happening. There's a fire alarm pulled. Well, let's figure out what needs to happen within access control of those things. There's a break-in over at this area, and these workflows within access control should now occur. Really easy automation type things that now we can take to that next step of AI. Now we can take that to machine learning to say, when this happens, these other things could potentially happen. And let's analyze the probabilities of those things and feed next level information to decision makers that can make those decisions, making life better for the corporation, better for the individuals, and allowing us to move.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you think about like the fundamental security triangle of deter, detect, respond, right? Like the layer in security, and using your fire, intrusion, video, and access control as an aggregate in those layers of saying, think about in a corporate setting, you have maybe video and sensors on the exterior at a certain time when no one's supposed to be there. Those get triggered, and so what happens now? And how do you automate those layers interacting with one another? And I think the biggest value would actually be to eliminate the false positives, to actually take the noise out of the system, to say, that was a deer, or that's a faulty wire in that glass break sensor that we should be getting an alarm from when it's going faulty, not when the wire falls out, right? And these like preventative, health and usage maintenance that can happen automatedly or autonomously and integrated with one another, and then learn from that, right? I think that's where I see the application of machine learning through that, is that when these incidents generate, then aggregate that data and do something with it. So if you know that, I'm working with a school district who's like, I got this issue, one door every winter because of heat on the inside, cold on the outside, it fluctuates, the door seal becomes wobbly, it causes an alarm, goes to the alarm monitoring company, they call the police 11 times a winter, like clockwork, right? And so our big design success criteria is to create a system that addresses that. They're like, we've tried different frames, different doors, different everything. Like, this door has to exist. It's an egress door. So what do we do? And so we're saying, all right, well, let's do monitoring with video verification of alarms before notification of authorities. Pretty simple. We already have a camera spec there. Alarm comes up, the pop-up, we look at it and say, it's the wind. We have a camera outside. We can go a quick 15-second rollback and say, nobody entered. We document it. We send email notification that it happened with the video surveillance footage to say, validated, nothing on either side. There you go. Instead of rolling the police and wasting everyone's time.
Agreed. And to answer your question one more time, I think there's an additional level to that you began to allude to, which is the video. And I think that it is an important next step within access control to find an ethical way to utilize facial recognition as a secondary authentication to the presentation of identity or credential. I'm not advocating for a primary.
Sarah's laughing.
To say, hey, your face should be your identity.
Yeah.
Because we know that is beginning to pick up a whole lot of negative momentum.
Yeah.
But there's a way to ethically use it that I present my credential and I'm authenticated facially or other markers. to allow validation that is the case, and it leverages video, which
Well, and you already
think
you mentioned, Rob, it's happening today. I mean, I for 9 years, I led a security organization that had an access control system and a security officer at a lobby that had the camera or the card identity pop up. And as people would run their badges, they were validating. Is your face this face?
Yep. Do we
It's already happening. Yeah.
And it can be nothing more than validation.
Yeah.
Of a check. Yep. I'm within these respective tolerances. Yes, no, or maybe.
And maybe it's just the notification. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
No, you're good. It's the opt-in versus opt-out concept. So are we giving permission or asking to access a space? I'm opting in. I'm not just being surveilled as I walk by, right?
That's exactly the key point.
Yeah, and even the possible mismatch notification, because even I was like, look, there's no way that my security officer who is trying to, I mean, there'd be 70 people flowing in at the beginning of the shift. So our expectation that he or she was positively identifying every picture popping up as it was scrolling through, it was a fool's errand. But we were able to tell our, this is what we're doing. This is why we like it. This is a main feature we have to have in our access control system. But if I could say that every time that someone badges in, that I have a facial recognition camera that's validating their photo against their face, and any possible mismatch then pops up, and I'm only notified when there's a possible mismatch, and I'm drawing my security officer attention to something that where he or she can intervene and have actionable intel, like that makes sense to me. And that's something that would add value to my organization and that I would pay money for.
And I love Sarah's comment of opt-in. Honestly, the reality is, if I can get the convenience and I don't have to carry my phone or a credential and just say I'm willing, grant access to using some measurement of me to allow me to just enter a facility, and as the user grant that, versus I've got this nefarious corporation capturing it and they're going to inappropriately use it.
Right.
Those are very different things.
Yeah. Having the option, right? Because that's where you find the middle ground between the person protecting the building and then the person entering the building, and how we find the morals that match and meet in the middle, and allow both involved in the picture to interact and get along, right? Because at the end of the day, facial recognition is viewed negatively. It has been for many years. How do we change it to a facial authentication concept? We're authenticating utilizing your biometric template, and we're not just doing that as you walk by. You are asking to go into this door. So me as the owner, I have every right to decide if you get to go in that door or not based on who you say you are. And here's how I'm going to authenticate and confirm you are, quote, who you say you are. You present your badge. If that face isn't matching that badge at my data center, I need to know. And I will tell you both, I'm not going to say exactly who's doing this, but it is happening as we speak. I mean, this is what the industry needs more of. This is where we need to give actionable data back to the end user to protect their people and not to hurt their people.
Right.
It's all about the morals. And also, what data are we storing, right? If you're going to use facial recognition, you don't need people's names. We just need to know a credential and a template to associate based on geography of a face. And if we enroll you with that, that's your credential now. That's your identity. But I don't need your name. I don't need to know what you look like. I don't need to know who you are. I just need to know that this assigned badge that I, as the owner, have given to someone is allowed to enter this space. And that's who it's matched to, that person's face, but maybe we just don't know their name. The access control can control the names, right? The access control can decide who gets what badge. And that's how we can
spot on.
the person. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's ways around there's ways to appropriately desegregate or segregate the information and the PII to,
Exactly.
and you got to be talking about that too, so that folks know. So when you're telling people what you're capturing, right, that you can articulate to them, I am not taking your face, right? I'm not matching it to your social security number and and all this other information, right? It's it's spread out. So yeah, I mean, that gets to that value proposition and that, integrity by design.
Yeah, spot on. Well, I will say, this conversation was great, Rob, and thank you for joining us, because I will say it definitely warrants a follow-up at some point, because now that we've set that stage with access control and a few of the examples you shared, we can probably continue coming up with, right, and suggesting to the industry, right, to here's how we need to evolve and change. And Jon, I want to thank you again for participating. Are there any last thoughts or any messages we want to leave off with?
From my perspective, it's just opportunity. And it's the old proverb of disrupt or be disrupted. And that's the opportunity in access control. And as we look at all kinds of technologies, whether it be AI, machine learning, credentials, mobile credentials, it doesn't matter. There's cloud computing, analyzation of data. The opportunities are endless, and it requires us to operate in a non-binary fashion of black and white, but to find ways to be inclusive with lots of other technologies, and we can maintain security and we can maintain ethics at the same time. And if we let entropy enter the space of we're just going to allow the market to drive to, potentially nefarious actions, it may get there, but there's lots of amazing people in this industry that are going to prevent that, and we need to continue to encourage them to innovate. Now let's keep going.
Yeah, I love that note. What about you, Jon?
Oh, you nailed it. It's all about opportunity. I think I couldn't say it any better. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for having me. And it sounds like I win. I get to come again.
Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you both again. And if anyone who's listening in wants to reach out to Rob, Rob, what is the best way to contact you? LinkedIn?
Hit me up on LinkedIn. It's Rob Lydic. So it's just put it in the search engine. You'll find me. I'm sure I look better in the picture that I've got there than I actually am on the video, but you'll figure it out.
Awesome. And same with Jon, LinkedIn.
Yep.
We're both there. And thank you all for tuning in today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.